All right, so CSS Grid is all about our page layout, and it's a direct parent-child relationship, just like Flexbox, meaning this will be my Flex container, or sorry, my Grid container, the direct parent, and inside of it, my entire website will be inside of this div. So using HTML semantic tags, I'll assign a few pieces here. I'll make a header for my site. This is my site header. I'll make a main content, which just has a bunch of p tags in it with lorem ipsum. For the sake of content, why does it tab over? Okay, and then outside of my main, I will have my footer. Got a great website. Let's lay it out a bit. And for the sake of making things a little bit more difficult, we will make a div, which will be a sidebar that will go on the left-hand side, kind of like our layout on the board there. And this will just have a few items inside of it that we'll have to orient. But of course, by default, HTML gives you no help, right? Everything just stacks and shows as it is. So let's first define what we want our layout to look at or look like. And to do that, we define it on our parent, the grid container itself. So let's go to Style CSS and grab our main layout. Or is it main container? Yeah, main layout, okay. Get rid of margin. Like sanity. Okay, yeah, now it looks like everything is the same. Doesn't help a whole lot. So main layout, how many columns do we want? Yeah, we want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns if we're looking at what we built there. So the parent, we can say first, your display, not flex, not block, you are display grid. You are a grid box. And then we can define what is your layout by saying grid template. So here's making our template. And then we define what part of the template we want to create. I will create the columns first. There's a few ways you can do this. You can do fixed pixels. You can say this column has to be 50 pixels wide always. You can say percentages. Another way you can say it is fractions, saying you should all take up the same amount of space column-wise. And if I want 6 columns all at the same size, I can say 1 fraction and then repeat this 6 times. And we don't see it, but something has already happened. Why is this? Columns. Thank you. There we go. Now we can see stuff popping to columns. That's what I was more expecting here. And if I hover over my parent, the grid container, notice the lines it's drawn for us on the page. And content is automatically filling the nearest column that it can, just by default. You see that starting on the left, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines. You can't see the first one or the 7th one because of the ending of the pages here and here. But now with this laid out, we can now start grabbing all the child elements inside of it and telling it where it belongs inside of the template. So, so it's a little easier to follow. We'll give each of these an ID. ID header, ID sidebar, and just be one word. ID main content, and ID footer. And I'm going to start off with a header, telling it to sit across the entire top of the page, because right now it's stuck in the top left corner in the first column. Now I can grab my header and tell it where to sit. And so that we can see it clearly, I will give it a background color of Dodger blue. So right now it's just filling the first column. Really, I would like it to fill all columns, but stay at the top. So let's tell it what columns to live in. I'll say your grid column should start at 1 and end at the last line. So what number is the last line again? If we hover over this, so 0 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 is the last line. As soon as we finish that off, it now fits the top of the page. So grid won't naturally work. You do have to tell it where to go, but once everything's been told where to go, you have your layout. So just so we can see it more like a header, I'll give it a height of 80 pixels or 60. Okay, so we got our header in the right place. Next, let's get our sidebar to sit here. It's already in the first column, so it's already where it needs to be. That's all right. We'll let's move on to main content. We'll come back to sidebar. So if that big open square on the picture is our main content, which grid lines does it live in? 2 to 7. Okay. So I'll say your grid column should be from 2 to 7. And so we can see it. We'll give it a background color. Fire brick. Okay, now it's fitting from 2 to 7. And we can go back and hover over our grid and in fact see it's matching perfectly to those lines. How many rows do we have now? So I got 6 columns, but how many rows? 3. Did I have to define my rows? Where did I define my rows at? I didn't. I only defined the columns. As soon as I start telling things to fit in columns, it will generate rows as needed. So since I told the header to fill the entire first row by saying go from the first to the last column, when I told main content to go from the second to the last column, it realized the first row is already taken, automatically generate another row and put it there. Well, that made the footer have no place to go, so it automatically created a third column so it had somewhere to put it until we assign it. So there are reasons why you define rows if you have a very strict layout you want to stick to. Just know they're also auto-created for you. You can just assign columns, things will start landing where they should. All right, who wants to help me put the footer across the bottom? I would like it to go from here to here. Okay, we'll give it a background color so we can see it. Let's do something awful. And now, now flex. I gotta tell it where to live in the grid. Yeah, I say the grid columns that you need to fill are the ones 1 through 7. Nice. Now, does the order in which I declared these important? Let's see. Nope.
The order on the HTML.
The order on the HTML is important, and that's because I have rows going for me. If you declare your rows and your columns, the order on the HTML does not matter at all. You can tell it to sit somewhere else. It will ignore where it is on the HTML. But since I'm just doing columns, since these are stacked on top of each other in HTML, they'll naturally still stack on top of each other in a grid.
And now in the grid, how would you get that background color and take up that white?
Right here.
Never mind. You just changed the height and then
Oh yeah, it was a little small. Cool. Well, yeah, now our sidebar, fortunately enough, our sidebar landed where it was supposed to. But if we go into here and actually look at it, we'll notice, well, yeah, it is filling the whole column. So I don't necessarily need to tell it where to go. I still will, because I like being specific. And we'll say your grid column is what? How do I tell it to only fit the first column? 1 to 2, because 1 is this first line here, 2 is the second line here. Well, this brings us to another problem now. Grid got our layout to where it is, but how do I now tell these items to line up in the center and kind of space out here? Oh, I can make this a flex box. What item is this? What element? Yeah, it's a sidebar. So this div is a direct parent to these children. This div is a direct child to main layout, so it's a grid child. It can also be a flex parent at the same time. So sidebar, while I've told it where to go in the grid from its parent up above, now I want to instruct its children on what to do. I'll say you are a flex box. Okay, that's not what I wanted. Let's change your direction to column so you go back to top to bottom. That's better. How do I justify things from top to bottom when I've changed my direction to column? Justify. When justify content does left to right, unless we flip the axis to be a column, now it does the top to bottom. So we'll do space round. Cool. And now I want them to be centered in that bar. What's doing the left to right right now? Align items does the left to right in this sentence, or in this situation. Cool. And just so we can see those links better, let's make them something easier to see. Okay. So I've made my layout with a grid, but then I'm orienting my content with flex boxes. And this is when you put these two together, it makes layout way easier to maintain, even with media queries. Let's say we needed this to go to a one column layout when we hit mobile. Well, it's all about just grabbing this and saying your new template column is just one. And then everything is stuck into one column. Well, what's another layout we could see with these four elements? What's something else we could do? Should we do a mobile layout where they all stack on top of each other? Yeah, we can make a media query. There's one more grid example we'll do after this, more of a game-like, but. So media query, we'll say at the, we started large, so we're gonna have to use max width and go down. We're gonna say when the max width hits 600 pixels, change it to be a mobile view. Right here, we're at 800, so about right here, it should snap and all go to laying on top of each other. So first, what do I need to grab to reassign my grid templates? What my grid should look like? Which main layout, that's the one taking control. Okay. So main layout. Do I need to tell it to be a display grid? Do I need to reiterate myself here and say you're still a grid? Right, that stuff has already been assigned earlier. The only thing we need to change is how many columns you have. So instead of display grid, I'll say grid template columns. Now you're just one column, one fraction wide, which will be the whole page. And let's just see what changes when we do that. Well, they all got smashed into a single, no, doesn't look like it got affected, did it? Let's see. Yeah, it's 515. Why isn't our grid snapping? Bummer, man. Interesting. I wonder if this is like adaptive view that's throwing it off. So then we hit 600. And you still have 6 columns. Well, we're all told life isn't fair. What's that? Yeah. Make sure it's just not doing anything. I didn't. Okay. That will break it. Okay. Those still work as I expected, but not the grid template columns. Well, let's see if we can assign stuff. In here, I'm going to tell the sidebar to be a grid column 1 through 2. Yeah, it's not picking up these. I'm not sure why. What's wrong with my media query? Start mobile first. Save yourself this time. If I can't get this to work, we'll look at the other example, which uses these anyways. Just a bit confused on why this is not working. So min width is if we're starting small and going big. This is where we're saying if we're larger than 600, don't use this, but if you get a max width of 600 or smaller, then change it. We could try to see if we can make this easier to see. See if it's actually happening. Then we'll know it's just a media query issue. Nope, it's not the media query. It's the grid being a jerk. So we can try assigning stuff just to see if it will pop into place at that time. Template columns. Template columns. Let's declare some grid template rows just to see if we can. So that's working. Son of a grid column 1 to 2. Interesting. Okay, let's scratch this. I don't want to like make a bad example, throw off what we just were looking at. So let's look at another example to drill in these basics. We'll look at queries with soon enough with this. So for the time being, I'm going to comment this out and make a second example so your notes have both. And I'm just going to make a div with 9 divs in it. Actually, let's give them a ID each. And give this an ID of grid container thing. Side note, in CSS, do you know how to grab multiple elements at once? Let's say I want to style all of these boxes that all have their own IDs to have a border and a width and a height. Yeah, I could. Yeah, that's going to be the, instead of grabbing all 9 IDs, why don't I just grab the grid container div and say all of your direct children divs should have a border and a width of 50 and a height of 50. Okay. We'll put numbers in here so we can follow them. Oh, don't do that. Cool, and I'd like all the numbers to be centered in their boxes. How do I perfectly center content inside of an element? Make all those little divs flex boxes and then say from your left to right, center. From your top to bottom, center. Yay. Okay, so that got all the divs. And now I'll just grab the grid container to make it a actual grid. Display grid and grid template columns. We're going to do 3. So I could say 1FR, 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 but CSS has methods and functions you can use. So if I don't want to repeat myself, I can say repeat 1FR 3 times. Nope, the other way around. 3 times 1FR. Same thing as writing 1FR, 1FR, 1FR. Okay, so I've got my grid here. Let's make it a little bit larger. And now we're going to play a little game of can we get the number to the right part of the grid? So we'll start off. Hannah, how could I select this div, the number 5, and get it to be where the number 10 is? I'd like these two divs to swap without changing the HTML. So we've got the ID of box 5 if we need to select this one.
I guess before you start, this is
How observant of you. Oh no. I do appreciate that. I don't like what it's doing to me. Okay, there we go. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So let me reiterate the question. Can we get the number 4 to go to where the number 9 is? By saying grid box 4, ID box 4. How do I get this to move here? And if you don't know, phone a friend.
You do grid column 3/4.
Okay.
And then grid row 4/5.
See what that does. Close. It's almost where the 9 was. What with it being down here, what has it told us we've done wrong?
I wrote that it's kind of low, it's a lot of place.
Yeah. So we've created another row by assigning it to a row that didn't exist. As soon as I back it down one, now we've got the 4 to sit where the 9 was. And it doesn't matter how our HTML was oriented. We told our CSS to overwrite that and put it somewhere else, which is nice. Okay, next one. Let's go Charles. I would like the number 2 to be where the number 8 is.
grid column 2 to 3.
Okay,
Grid row. Set that under
8.
Three to 4.
Let's see. Ah, so close. What has it told us we've done wrong?
Grid column.
Yeah, we got to move it back a column to 1 to 2. There we go. All right, so this is supposed to be a simple example of just using a grid, but to show you with a layout, it's all about just telling it where to live. If we wanted, let me do one more here. Chris, I want the number 6 to take up this entire row.
Grid row. Not sure how you assign it.
So the first line is 1. Or here's 1, 2, 3, 4 for the rows. So if I want the 6 to fill in this entire row,
1, 4.
so that will make it fit all of this, the up and down, because we're doing rows up and down. So instead of grid row 1 through 4, I'm trying to assign it to go span all columns, but fill this whole row. Let's try that. Cool. Now, why is the box still the same size? Why didn't it stretch to fit? Because I told all of them to be 50 pixels wide. Now, when I'm in a grid, it'll find empty space. Let's see if this works. If I say always fit the box you put in, say be 100% wide. Now, if I move it somewhere else, it'll automatically fit the available space. So if I move 6 back to be where it was, it'll zip back down into a teeny box. But since I've set the width of all these divs to be 100% of what they're allowed to be in, grid allows that space. So fit 100% of your position, now 6 is right in the center. Okay, last one. We're just making a mess of our layout here. It's great. Box 9. I would like box 9 to fill the whole first row. Aaron, can you help? Yeah, box 9 needs to be there.
Grid column. It's gonna be, one over 3.
Close. That got the first 2 columns filled. So let's add one more column to that. Okay, so we got the width of the 9 worked out. It's going a little wonky here, but it's because we haven't told it everywhere to sit. How do I get it to sit at the top?
Do a row.
Grid row.
1 over 4.
So if I did 1 over 4, it's going to be enormous because it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to try to fit all this. It is sitting in the middle now, but let's say 1 to 2. There we go. Because 1 to 2 is top line to second line, fill this row, and then column is saying from 1, 2, 3, 4. Exactly. And you'll get little bugs like this where it's, oh, I know I didn't tell anything to fit that spot, and so it's not. So I could, like, you know, maybe.
You change the width to 100%.
So I did on all the boxes, I changed the width to 100%. If I did that to the height as well, which isn't as preferred, I don't know if it'll even work. Yeah, it won't even work. Height and percentages just don't do well together. But I could say, you know, I have this empty space. It would make sense for 3 to fit that spot. So I'd grab 3. I'm like, you're already in the right column, but your row needs to span from the second line to the 4th line. And then it'll fill that spot, or it should if it did what I told it to. Oh, it's angry at me now. Whoa, that was unexpected. So what we're having here is an example of competing rules, trying to assign stuff to the same rows and columns, and starting to fail at fixing it for me. But that's okay, this is just for an example. We weren't going for any specific layout. But nothing has changed in our HTML, right? It's all with grid. And then every item in the grid was its own little flex box so we could center the numbers in them. Oops, pause recording. The first 3 say don't use grid template areas, which means use grid columns, and you're trying to make this effect. So you'll make a div with 5 divs inside of it and try to make this layout on your page, then this layout, and then this layout. So with responsive layouts, we're gonna have to look at it, aren't we? Yeah. I would save this part, don't do the responsive layouts yet, just do the first 2 examples to get grid down, because this is more than enough for your business time project. We'll look at responsive layouts later this week as we get closer to the next website that we build. But changing our grid when we swap stuff around. Yeah. So for now, just use grid template columns and do the first 2 questions on this, saving the rest for later. And with that, there's going to be another exercise that this is in your own, you know, when you need practice, it's just more practice problems. Write a function that does something. So if you're doing edit, that's what this is. Feel free to kind of, you know, swap this in for edit or just keep doing code challenges online. But this is just to get you to write a few more functions. You might get through it quickly, you might not. We'll go over some of the things it's asking for later. And let's give some time to work on the grid. This is the first 2 examples. Work on that for about 30 minutes. We'll do another little lesson around 11:45 before lunch.